Okay, we are ready. Just going to make sure that this hooks up to the screen. Okay, so everybody, let's go to the end of session. One, and we're taking a look at different worldviews, right? Because remember, when we talk about apologetics, we have to be aware of the way that people are approaching these different questions. We can't just say, give me the evidences for Christianity. We have to recognize that people are always going to look at the evidences that we present for the Christian faith through a certain lens. And we talked about two worldviews last week. Shout out the first one. Remember the first one? Secularism. How would we describe secularism if we could sum it up kind of quickly? No God. God's not allowed. Keep him out. Yeah. Human choice. It's just all up to humans. Like, we make the decisions. It's all about what we do. Humanism would be another word for it. Yep. Anything else? No absolute truth. That's right. There's really no such thing as right or wrong. We can talk about right or wrong, but we have to remember that human beings are the ones who decide what's right and wrong. There's nobody really in charge as far as God goes. We're in charge. That would be secularism. What was the other one? MTD, which stands for moralistic therapeutic deism. Yep. And if you're there, a couple pages into lesson one, you're going to see those 5 principles of moralistic therapeutic deism. How would you summarize that up briefly? What are some characteristics of MTD?
Be nice, be good, be fair.
Yep, be nice, be good, be fair.
Everybody goes to heaven.
Oh, God on my terms? Yeah.
Everybody goes to heaven.
Everybody goes to heaven. Yep.
It acts like a virus.
It acts like a virus. It has to inhabit a host, typically churches or societies, but often it can infect a church, a denomination, a church congregation. Yeah. Anything else about MTD?
Common among teens.
Common among teens. Yeah. However, the teens that were interviewed by Christian Smith when he did his research are now probably parents, because he interviewed teenagers in 2005. Do you remember the song we had to summarize secularism? Imagine by John Lennon. Did we do a song for moralistic therapeutic deism? If you wish upon a star. It's kind of a Disneyland kind of approach to faith, that God is a genie or a fairy godmother. So let's take a look at the page in lesson 1, session 1, about the Christian worldview. We have to talk a little bit about the Christian worldview. We're hopefully more familiar with that one. We kind of summarize secularism as no God allowed, right? Moralistic therapeutic deism is God light. And then we would call the Christian worldview God glorified. Now, and this is why I gave you copies of the Catechism, because when we look at the Christian worldview, Luther's Small Catechism gives us a nice little summary of the Christian worldview when we talk about God. So open up, if you would. We might need a couple copies of these over here. Anyone else need one? So if you open up to page 3, the first commandment, you shall have no other gods. Let's read it together. What does this mean? We should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. Now, those last 3 words, above all things, what does that tell us about God?
Not a thing.
What?
He's not a thing.
It's not a thing. Okay, above all things. So he's not just an optional thing, right? He's not an extracurricular activity, right? Most important, yeah. So God's at the center. Yeah. Yep. Anything else?
He's at the top.
Yep, he's at the top, and there's nothing above God. So we are forbidden as Christians to fear, love, or trust in anything less than God. But we're called to fear, love, and trust in him above all things. Yeah. Which actually makes sin a little bit more common, right? You know what I mean? Like we think of sin as just doing bad things. But if we take the first commandment seriously, it's like, oh, we sin every day, right? Because we fear, love, and trust in all kinds of people and things and experiences more than the one true God. Yeah. So another part of the catechism that helps us anchor our worldview is that first, or really the Apostles' Creed. So maker of heaven and earth. So I put down there, draw below a picture of what the Christian worldview looks like. Any thoughts on if you could draw the Christian worldview, what might it look like?
Put God in the center of all things and the spokes coming out from it, including everything, creation and life and animals and plants, and he's the center of everything.
Okay, yeah, so kind of like a bicycle wheel where if you removed the center, it'd fold in on itself, right? And that's a good visual. Maybe that works for you, is that God's at the center and everything emanates from him and is focused in on him. Anyone else? How would you draw the Christian worldview if you could visualize it?
All of the people, all of the human beings are looking only at him and not at anything else. Completely focused there.
Okay, so everybody is collectively focused. Okay. That sounds a little bit like the resurrection of the body and the life everlasting. Yeah. Any other thoughts on how you might sketch this out?
Just to add to the spokes on the wheel, because I was thinking first that God would be up here and then things like, then if he's in the center, you have the spokes connected. It's like it's back and forth, like 2 ways.
Okay.
He's involved in our lives.
So there's some connection there. Yeah.
Everyone would be carrying the cross.
Okay. So there's some letting go of self for the sake of God. The way I drew this is, I think of it as like the solar system. So in the solar system, what's at the center? Right. It's called a solar system, right? I mean, the sun's at the center. And what orbits around it? Planets. And there's a gravitational pull that pulls the planets around. And if those planets ever lost the sun as the center, they would just drift off into darkness, right? And so I like to see the Christian worldview as God being like the sun from which emanates all light and heat and life, and everything kind of orchestrates around God as the center. Now, think with me on this. If we understand the Christian worldview as a solar system with God at the center and everything circling God, what does moralistic therapeutic deism look like if you could visualize it? I think you just said it. Everything orbits around me. So imagine a solar system in which the sun orbits around the earth. You see that? That's the big difference between Christianity and moralistic therapeutic deism. Both are talking about God. But one is focused on God as the center of our worship, our praise, fear, love, trust, serve, obey. But in moralistic therapeutic deism, it's saying, sure, God exists, but God is really about me. God is going to help me fulfill my dreams and my goals. God's going to be useful to me. God's going to help me be blessed. Now, does that sound like a lot of American Christianity? Yeah. Like Joel Osteen, right? Where God is useful. God helps me achieve a goal or a dream. Now, should we come to God and ask him for help? Yeah. But we need to also align ourselves to what God's will is. And moralistic therapeutic deism doesn't say, what is God's will? It says, what's my will and how can God help me with it? It's kind of subtle, right? Now, if secularism were the solar system, what would it look like? It's chaos.
That's just like no orbit, just floating out there.
Yeah, maybe kind of just going, drifting, running into each other. There's no orbit. Where's the sun?
Circling me.
Potentially. It's not there. Yeah, it's just not there. In the secular worldview, there's just no sun. It's just everybody for themselves. So let's move on to the next page, to this big picture worldview questions. I'm just going to run through this really quickly because we could get stuck here for a long time. I want you to kind of see how each of these worldviews is answering questions differently. Now, each worldview is going to respond to these big questions. So look at the top left corner, big picture question. And if you go straight down, let's just read those questions in bold together. Who am I? Who is God? Why am I here? What's the problem? What's the solution? Every worldview is going to ask and answer these questions. Everybody you have a conversation with, atheist, Buddhist, agnostic, meaning they don't know what they believe, Christian, MTD, they're all going to answer these questions, whether they know it or not. Inevitably, they have to answer the question by how they live, right? And by the way, if you look straight down at these questions, aren't these the things that make for a good story? That's what's kind of interesting about this. Any book that you read, you have a character who says, who am I, right? Why am I here? The character has a problem. The character has a solution. So when I try to help people understand worldview, one of the things that I've done with like high school students is I'll say, what is the worldview of Darth Vader? How would he answer the question, who am I? Why am I here? What's my problem? What's the solution? He's going to have specific answers to those questions, and it kind of charts out the story. Everybody you ever meet sees themselves within a story. Life is like a story. And they're going to be asking these questions, even if they don't know it, and answering them inevitably by how they live. So how might secularism ask the question, who am I? Once again, I'm going to just run through this quickly, so you can just take notes. So secularism, and this is in the box, we're going from left to right here from that who am I. Secularism would say, who am I? What does it mean to be a human being? What's my identity? Secularism would say, I am atoms and molecules. I am my genes and my environment. You know, just people are just kind of cause and effect. There's no soul. There's no spirit. One secular person has put it this way, that human beings, that we are, you are a meat computer, right? You have a brain that happens to be able to process information. Who is God according to secularism? So going down, they would say that God is a wish dream, that God is, like Marx said, the opium of the masses, or like Freud said, just a father figure that we project. Why am I here? According to secularism, I think many secular people would say, why not? Or I am here for pleasure, or for my own sense of meaning or fulfillment, whatever I decide that that is. What's the problem? In other words, what's the main problem with the world? Why is the world such a bad place? Why do I experience pain and sadness? Secularism would say, well, for one, the universe is a cold, impersonal place that doesn't care about you. The problem could be your genetics, your genes. The problem could be your environment. The problem could be natural things like pain and death. But I think also that secularism would say that pain and death are the mechanism by which life arose and became what it is. Just complete natural selection. Secularism might say the problem is a lack of technology or a lack of education. And it might even say that religion is the problem. Somebody like Richard Dawkins would say that. He wrote a book called The God Delusion, How Religion Poisons Everything. So he would definitely say religion is not the evolution of the species. It's kind of de-evolution. And yeah, that's tricky though, because a truly secular person will have to say that religion exists as a product of evolution. So, but how is it that 90% of the human population believes in God as a product of evolution if there is no God? It's kind of like, you know, lemmings jump to their death, which is not a great adaptation, right? It's not great for survival. Why is it that human beings, almost all human beings, have this instinct for something that doesn't exist? That's just kind of a weird quirk that I don't think secularism explains it well. So, but then again, we got to go a little deeper. Secularism might not even say that the things that we encounter as problems should even be called problems, because if death is natural, why is it a problem? If pain is natural, why can we say it's a problem? If you're going to be a truly secular person, you kind of have to admit that. So what's the solution in secularism? I would say knowledge, knowing more, science, politics, and also unlimited freedom, meaning that I get to do what I want to do and nobody gets in the way, because you only live once. Now let's move up to moral. Well, any questions about secularism before we move on? About the way they kind of would think about the big questions. Now, not every secular person you're going to meet is going to be consistent. Because some people who are secular will live as if life has meaning, and they will live as if there's such thing as good and evil, and as if there's such thing as truth. And we would just say that they're living inconsistent with what they believe. And that's one of the arguments we make in Christian apologetics, is that if you're going to live according to a worldview that's not true, you're going to have to live with inconsistencies. And part of the role of the Christian apologist is to ask good questions to help people to see the contradiction. So when people say, I believe in human rights, but they also don't believe in God. Well, why should humans have rights? I don't know, because they're humans. Yeah, but how are humans any different than animals? Well, they're not. So then why should they have rights? Well, because we say they should. But what if the people who are in charge say that we shouldn't? Do you have anything to appeal to say that that's wrong? See how it gets kind of dicey? Let's move up to moralistic therapeutic deism. So who am I in moralistic therapeutic deism? I am the center of attention. And I'm a mostly good person. And I'm special. Not special in the way we would say as Christians we're special. We can say as Christians that we're each special, but we say that in a humble, thankful way. Moralistic therapeutic deism says we're special in an entitled way. Who is God? Lots of different words we can use here. God is like a genie. He's like Santa Claus, fairy godmother, a butler, kind of a pushover, kind of a cosmic therapist. Kind of like the dashboard Jesus or the buddy Christ. Kind of giving you a thumbs up and a wink, you know. Why am I here? To be happy and feel good. Accomplish my goals, my dreams. To live my best life. What's the problem? I would say definitely for moralistic therapeutic deism in the Western world, America in particular, we would say the problem is what we call first world problems. And by first world problems, it's like, I don't have the most up-to-date iPhone. Or I couldn't go to the college I wanted to, and I have to go to this college. You know, it's things that aren't life and death, like starvation. Other problems would be failure, not living my best life. Or I think that sometimes moralistic therapeutic deism isn't always sure what the problem is. Like, I think that people run into the rough edges of life, but they don't really have a theology that explains why there's suffering in the world, why there's difficulty, or that expects those things as normal. What's the solution? I think the solution would be feeling good, my own personal efforts. To quote a country music song, you know, Jesus take the wheel. not in like a help me and save me from my sins kind of way, but like a, hey, I'm typically driving, but things are out of control, so can you drive for a little bit? Like we only come to God when we have a problem. My own efforts, distraction. I think for MTD, distraction, like just scrolling on that screen, can be the solution. And even God can be the solution. But God is the solution insofar as he is helpful to me in achieving my goals and dreams. Now we're going to see that then in Christianity, it's way different. So who am I according to Christianity? I am created in the image of God, and I am created to glorify God. I'm created to be loved by God and love others. The Westminster Catechism puts it this way: what is the chief end of man? To glorify God and enjoy him forever. Luther, in the second article of the Creed's explanation in the Catechism, says, that I may be his own and live under him in his kingdom. It's good purpose. Who is God? According to Christianity, God is the center of everything. And if you want a good Bible verse you can put there, guess what book it comes from? Romans 11:36. For from him and to him are all things. Why am I here? I'm here to glorify God, to love others. Notice the focus on others and not myself. A key word there too is I'm here to live out my vocations or my callings. I'm here to be living in love as a father, a mother, a husband, a wife, a neighbor, a friend, a son or a daughter, whatever job we have. What's the problem in Christianity? No, this is important. In every other worldview, the problem is something natural. In Christianity, the problem is something unnatural, meaning that sin is an unnatural kind of invasion into this world. So, for example, C.S. Lewis said that there's no such thing as God didn't create anything evil. And of all the world religions, Christianity is the one that affirms the goodness of the created world the most. But within God's good creation, there are only good things used in the wrong way, the wrong amount, or at the wrong time. So Christians would say there's no such thing as anything created evil. Evil is like an alien intrusion from the outside, brought about because of sin. We can even say sin is the most unnatural thing in the world. So the problem will be sin, death, the devil, that language from the Catechism, rebellion. Really, that God's not at the center. We could say idolatry is the problem. There's multiple different ways we can diagnose it. Whenever God is not the center of everything, everything falls apart. What's the solution? Now, here's a difference that I want you to see between Christianity and all the other worldviews. The solution depends upon who in the other worldviews? Me. So in secularism, we as human beings, we have to do the research and we have to do the exploration and we have to do the hard work and we have to change the laws and we have to do all these things. We have to have better education and we have to try hard. And then you die. Or in moralistic therapeutic deism, I have to try hard and I have to dream big and I have to accomplish my goals. Same thing with Hinduism or Buddhism. I have to work. I have to do the good works. But what about Christianity? God did it. Yeah. It's all done in Christ. It's all a gift. By the way, there's no other religion in the world that teaches that. That God does it entirely from A to Z. Or as Paul says in Romans, our reading for this Sunday, from faith and for faith, or from faith to faith, meaning it's from faith from beginning to end. Yeah, so the solution is Christ. It's his death, it's his resurrection, his return. It's not our efforts. Now, this next part, imagine that you're having a conversation with a friend who has a different worldview than your own. How do you think each would respond to the following statements? Why would they respond this way? Let's look at this first one. Statement number one. The historical evidence points very strongly to the conclusion that Jesus Christ was crucified, died, and was buried, and then bodily raised on the third day. What might be a secular person's response to that statement?
Show me the evidence.
Show me the evidence. Let's say that you show that person the evidence in a very convincing way so that they're not exactly sure how to explain their point. What might they say?
You can't trust that evidence. It's not scientific.
But what if it's on good historical grounds? What if you measure the resurrection of Jesus Christ according to the way that historians determine what happened, and it passes? We'll talk about this in session 5, I think. If you've already decided there's no God, then all of that evidence doesn't matter, right? Because even if I present it to you, if you already don't believe there's a God, you're going to say, well, there must be some other explanation, right? Do you see that? Now, with some secular people might be really curious about the evidence. They might think about it. They might even be persuaded by it. But by and large, I think that when people are experiencing evidence for the Christian faith, like the historical evidence for the resurrection, if you've already believed that God doesn't exist and therefore miracles are impossible, then there must be another explanation. How might moralistic therapeutic deism respond to that same statement? Is MTD cool with Easter? Like, would it come to Easter Sunday? Easter Bunny?
Get a new dress, go to a nice service at church and have a good dinner and be with your family, and it just feels good.
Feels good, yeah. I put down here that the response might be to Jesus being raised from the dead. That's nice. I guess miracles happen sometimes. But it has no real impact because we don't have the same definition of the problem. Because the problem in moralistic therapeutic deism is, why can't I feel good and happy? Does the resurrection of Jesus solve that problem of making you happy right now? Well, it could give you some good feelings, right? You know, I mean, we feel great on Easter Sunday when we sing, Christ the Lord is risen today, and that's some good feelings. But do you see what I mean? Is that like, if your problem, if you, the problem you're wrestling with is sin, death, and the devil, then the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the best news you could ever hear. But if your problem is first world problems of just, I want to be more popular, or I want more people to like me, or I want to do better in life, then the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is just kind of like, sure, I guess, but not really what I needed. It's kind of like having a medication for a problem you don't have. And honestly, that's why I think the gospel falls on deaf ears so often, even in churches, is because we don't always understand how desperately we need Christ. Because if we recognize the real reality of our sickness, the real reality of our need, we would flee to Christ and treasure him. That's like, I'm really convinced that one of the reasons people don't come to church, there's a lot of reasons people don't come to church. So I'm not being black and white here. But one of the reasons I think that people don't come to church or don't come to hear the word of absolution, one of the reasons people don't come to the Lord's Supper is because they don't actually think they're sinners. Because if you really did know that you're a sinner, you'd be like, I need that, right? But moralistic therapeutic deism doesn't think that being a sinner is the problem. It thinks that not being happy is the problem. And so then can you see how somebody embracing MTD would have a very casual relationship with church and the Lord's Supper? It'd be like, yeah, I could take that or not, right? Do you want to work through these next two questions, or do you want to move to the next lesson? Huh? You want to go through?
I do.
You want to squeeze all the juice out of this lesson? Okay. Byron spoke, So statement number 2, the universe has purpose and meaning. How might a secular person respond to that statement? The universe has purpose and meaning, which we would say as Christians, right? That's just here for no reason. As long as it's for me, okay?
There is no purpose in meaning, it just is.
It just is.
I don't think they think that it does. I think they just see, like you said before, a cold and personal place that doesn't care about you. So how can they have purpose and meaning? I just don't think they need to recognize it that way.
Yeah.
Well, I think there can be secularists without being nihilists.
Like saying there's no meaning for anything.
Yeah, but it's assign your own meaning.
Right. Yeah, I think we call this existentialism, right?
Yeah.
Where there's no, we have kind of recognized there's no meaning in the universe, and so you have to create your own meaning. And there's some movies out there too that I think are about that idea. I think the movie Fight Club would be one, and the movie Garden State would be one, where there's no meaning in life. You have to just you have to make the meaning. I could imagine some very, very more like hardcore secular people saying, no, the universe doesn't have purpose and meaning. It just seems like it does. Because a lot of times secularism will try to explain every behavior, thought, feeling we have through what's called evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology is evolution as the explanation for everything. And so what that means is that anything you do as a human, from going to church to, liking fat, sugar, and salt. It all has to go back to what caused our ancestors to survive. And it's not all wrong. I mean, I think there is some, it kind of makes sense that as human beings, we crave things that we used to have scarcities of, you know, like you used to not have a lot of fat, sugar, and salt. And so if you crave those things because they're in short supply, now they're in abundant supply, and that's kind of a problem. But but evolutionary psychology will go to such a degree that it's going to say that even something like religion, or even something like the belief that there's meaning in life, is because somewhere in our human history, in evolution, we needed that to survive. Does that make sense? So even the idea that there's such thing as beauty or truth or meaning is just something that helped us survive. And so the fact that you like a sunset and you think it's pretty is because something made that advantageous for us as the human race to continue to pass on our genes and survive. But the argument eats itself alive. That's the problem, is because if everything that we see in this world, and the meaning we assess to things like this is beautiful or that's true, goes back to evolution and can be explained that our brains developed that way to see those things, then we have to even ask about the scientific method. Is it reliable? How can we trust the scientific method? How can we trust evolution if we can't trust our other instincts? Does that make sense? The argument eats itself alive. And even atheist philosophers have noted this. They've said, this doesn't make sense. I think a moralistic therapeutic deism person would say the universe has purpose and meaning. Sure, its purpose is for me to be blessed, happy. What about statement number 3? There is such a thing as right and wrong. What might be a secular response to that? Kind of your truth is your truth, which works until it doesn't. Whatever you want to believe, yeah. Which works until it doesn't. Because like a secular person would be fine with that if it's like, oh, I'm Hindu or I'm Buddhist, until you have somebody who says, well, I'm a member of the KKK. Be like, oh, we were cool with you until you said that. You can believe whatever you want except certain things. You know what I mean? Like that's where, once again, we have ideas that make sense until they don't, where we can say things like, believe whatever you want. Not really though, right? There's some things that if you believe them, we'll be like, no, but you shouldn't believe that. Does that make sense? Or there's no such thing as right and wrong, and truth is situational. That's true until it's like gets into taboo things, right? That even people who don't believe in truth would say, oh, you shouldn't do that though. Yeah, it makes sense until it doesn't. Any other thoughts? There is such a thing as right and wrong. How might a secular person respond to that statement?
Well, maybe for you, but not for me. What you believe is right. I'm going to try to do that.
Which then it'd be really interesting to say, is there anything that you and I both should believe as right and wrong? And if so, why? I put down that somebody might say, yes, there is such a thing as right and wrong, but don't bring God into it. Or they would say, no, it only seems that there's right and wrong. It's actually what we call reciprocity, right? I scratch your back, you scratch my back. You know, some people would make the argument that all morals are based on kind of, monkeys used to pick lice out of their hair and eat it, You ever seen a picture of monkeys doing that for each other? It's kind of the idea, the secular idea of morality is how it happened. Is that like, we kind of figured out that, hey, if I help you, you help me. The problem though, is it doesn't make sense of all morality, because then we have things like altruistic behavior. Sometimes that will cost us much, and sometimes it's for people who were not even part of their tribe. Does it make sense that people in the same tribe would do that? But why do people take great risks financially or even their own physical safety to go out and help somebody who is different than them, that maybe has no way to reciprocate, right? I don't think that evolution has a good explanation for that. It just doesn't. What about moralistic therapeutic deism? How might that respond to there is such a thing as right and wrong?
I think there is a right or wrong.
Yeah, I think, yeah, there would be that. Anything to add to that?
There is right one, but it doesn't really matter.
I would think they would say, yeah, like, well, yeah, that's right, wrong, but it's all up to you and what your viewpoint is, or what you believe, or what your orientation is, or, you know, just something that makes you happy.
Yeah.
Guided by
Yeah, it's kind of lowest common denominator, watered down. It's like morality light. Yeah, I said here the response would be sure, but only as long as right and wrong doesn't inconvenience me or make me feel bad. Because that's the original sin in moralistic therapeutic deism, is to be made to feel bad. If anything makes us feel bad or uncomfortable, that's the mortal sin, I guess you'd say, in moralistic therapeutic deism, or the unforgivable sin is when you make somebody feel bad. And Christians aren't the only ones who've noted this. There's a really interesting book. I think the guy's Jewish, Abraham something. He wrote a book called The Rise of the Therapeutic. And therapeutic comes from a Greek word which means healing, and so it's a good word, but it means therapeutic in the sense of just feeling good about yourself. How that just predominates all of our conversations. We don't really ask, is it true? We ask, does it make me feel good? And can you see how that gets into churches? I think even in every church, there's a pressure to only do what feels good rather than what's real.
Everybody likes the truth until it makes them disappointed or deeply disappointed or depressed or weakened in some way.
Leviticus, that doesn't really make me feel good sometimes.
Yeah, it's super boring too. Yeah. Well, so yeah, let's just maybe close on this point, and we will do session 2 next time. This class reminds me of classes I've taken where like you get about 2 lessons in like a 6-lesson class, but there's a lot to talk about. So I think this is one of the reasons why church attendance has gone down in most churches in the United States, because we live in a pretty consumeristic society, right? Where like we watch commercials that are super exciting, even the volume gets louder, and they kind of grab you and draw you in, and they're offering you an experience and to get the dopamine flowing, right? And then you come to church, and some churches will do that, right? I mean, they have like laser lights and fog machines and a really loud rock band, and then you come to a Lutheran church and it's like, you know, but no, I mean, but just traditional kind of like, we're going to be just focused on Jesus. Like our songs are going to be about Jesus. They're not going to be about God, make me awesome, you know? And we're going to have like even times where we're like kind of silent, you know, and we go up and we eat a little piece of bread and drink a little sip of wine. I mean, that's not what people are always looking for, right? And so if we look at worship as a consumer experience, it's going to I think that it's going to let people down, because if you want to come to worship and just feel awesome every week, well, then you got a preacher who's preaching to you God's word and is saying there's this thing called sin. And not only is there this thing called sin, but you can't save yourself. And you must rely on somebody else, Christ. That's totally countercultural. And I think that sometimes, you know, our culture just looks at that and says, when's the football game, right? So we need to be aware as a church that we need to not be reacting to culture and mimicking culture, because you can only do that for so long, and then people get bored with that too. Does that make sense? Like sometimes I see the church doing this, where the church will try to be all about hype and like, let's just make this as exciting as we can, and let's just like dog and pony show. You can do that, but then if you do it, you have to take it to the next level. And every time you do that, you have to let go of something sacred, and then you take it to the next level and the next level. And before you know it, it's all just a big show and there's no Jesus. Yeah. Any thoughts, questions before we end? All done? All right. So next week, we'll just briefly go through next week. Next week, I just want you to see next week that everybody believes in God, even if they say they don't. That's a kind of a tall claim, but I really think it's true that even Scripture teaches that everybody knows there's a God. And that's the Bob Dylan song. You got to serve somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you have to serve somebody or something, right? And I think that'll help us understand that even your not religious friends are religious. They're just not religious about God. They're religious about something else. All right, thank you, everybody.
Yeah.